Illuminati want my mind, soul, and my body.
Outside of NIST, a government agency, there's no architects fighting for to debunk the Tower 7. There's none. There's about 100,000 architects and engineers in the associations, like the American Association of Architects, and there's about 100,000. And Richard Gage, he's one of them, and he didn't know anything about. He thought it wasn't an inside job. It took him years, and then he didn't really know about Tower 7. Most of them don't know about Tower 7. What he does now, he discovered it, and what he does now is just go from convention to convention, sitting 15 architects down at a time, and boom, about 99% of them, they all believe it. They didn't even know there was a third tower. It was not in the media that much.
You also say, based on the interviews and research you had done, that a third building came down that day, wasn't hit by an airplane, but you write that it did contain a lot of records that certain members of the financial industry didn't miss. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Well, this was a building that was a World Bank building, and from our understanding from the research that's been done, there were just billions of dollars worth of gold down below. There were also a lot of records in that building that they conveniently disappeared. This is Security and Loan Administration scandal, a lot of things along those lines. They were records that these groups were not sorry to see vanish into thin air. And Building 7, just the notion that it came down at all, when, as you said, it wasn't struck by an aircraft. I think, honestly, and I hate to say this, but I think half the Americans you could ask, how many buildings came down in New York that day? They would say 2. They would not say 3. And Building 7 was a skyscraper. It was not as tall as the 2 main buildings, but it was very substantial. And since jet fuel burns about the temperature of diesel, which isn't enough to melt steel in the first place, the notion of the third building coming down after not even being struck by an aircraft, it's pretty far out.
They basically ignored it.
I think that's crazy. I think by this time everybody knows about Tower 7.
They still don't know. Most people don't know. No, but they don't talk about it on the mainstream media. How could anybody know?
But people have talked about it enough online to the point
maybe
where I don't
now
think
more than ever, but
yeah.
still now more than ever. Yes, they hear about that Tower 7 thing, but they don't really know the details. They just kind of just know about it, you know.
Did you ever see the video that shows the full collapse, which takes a lot longer? You see the first collapse. It was the top of the thing falls into the center, and
that's the elevators.
It happens. Yeah.
They explain architects and engineers. I've sat with them. I'm no structural engineer, but you tell them common sense.
What did they say to you?
This is if someone told you there's 85 columns that hold up Tower 7, and if someone told you, if a structural engineer told you, would you think he was crazy or would you believe him? If he said, and it makes sense. I mean, it's common sense. The only way you're going to get a building to come down like that, any building, any structure, is you have to blow up all 80 columns at the same time. Otherwise, it won't go down like that. To me, that's common sense. To someone who believes NIST, the government agency, said, no, that's not true. One column went and then it spiraled out of control because of fires. When you talk to structural engineers, I've had Richard Gage on my podcast twice. Every time he comes back, he gets more. He just piles on more. He goes, all I got to do is sit him down. They don't know. Nobody knows. That's the truth.
So, most people don't even know that there were 3 towers. So I always start out with the basics. I mean, this third tower, World Trade Center 7, was 47 stories high. And it came down the afternoon of 9/11, 7 hours after the Twin Towers. It wasn't hit by an airplane. It was part of the World Trade Center complex, about 300 feet from the North Tower. And in the afternoon at 5:20, after witnesses hear explosions that rocked the ground, this building begins a sudden, symmetrical descent straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. This is in the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. So even a child who's seen these on TV says, hey, that's a controlled demolition. Yeah. But yet most architects are completely unaware of the collapse of this structure, even though it's the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. This is incredible. This should be the most studied building failure in all of structural engineering, and yet most structural engineers know nothing about it. So that's the reason we've made it our primary effort to expose the academic profession and the technical professionals in the fields of architecture and engineering to the information. So we now have 2,500 architects and engineers signed on to our petition demanding a new investigation of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers.
In my 29 years of being a firefighter, I have never, ever seen anything of this scale.
The image is utterly indelible. A blackened monolith among the tower blocks. A desolate, burnt-out shell, an accusing finger. How and why did this terrible fire happen? Why? So many lives lost.
An engineer told you, a dude who builds skyscrapers told you to your face, like I've been told to my face. They said the only way that thing, and you see it on video, engineer after engineer after engineer. Are they all crazy? Engineer after engineer. They go, it's impossible when you look into it. It's impossible for a building to collapse like that unless all 80 columns are blown up at the same time.
Among the most egregious examples is the explanation for the collapse of World Trade Center 7 as a Rube Goldberg sequence of unlikely events culminating in the almost symmetrical collapse of a steel frame building into its own footprint at freefall acceleration. I believe that NIST is one of the crown jewels of the U.S. federal government and an organization of staggering brilliance. But with respect to the World Trade Center investigation, I think that something went very wrong. NIST has painted itself into a corner while the walls of evidence and reason close in. One need only read the Europhysics news article and NIST's response to see that. My understanding is that police detectives use the term guilty demeanor to describe the dodging and weaving of a guilty party that desperately claims innocence. One does not need any technical background to see the display of guilty demeanor in the various NIST presentations regarding the World Trade Center investigation and reports. This is especially true of the investigation leaders, who repeatedly evade, dismiss, and obfuscate their way through incomplete and nonsensical explanations. It is not my intention to attack these individuals in making my point, as they may in fact have been under duress. But if the NIST World Trade Center investigation and reports prove false, then they are culpable nonetheless. National security concerns are their own worst enemy. The excuse has worn thin that evidence or information must be withheld due to national security concerns. The irony is that the secretive cloak of national security has itself become a serious threat to our pursuit of happiness with the corruption and dishonesty that it breeds. If NIST truly believes in the veracity of its investigation, then it should openly share all evidence, data, models, computations, and other relevant information unless very specific and compelling reasons are otherwise provided. National security concerns and public safety concerns do not stand in isolation. They participate in a balance with accountability. The official narrative of 9/11 has begun to unravel, and that unraveling may accelerate. One need only look at recent events, such as the appearance of the Europhysics news article, to see that unraveling in action. As a result, there may be a sequence of painful revelations. We may find that the United States federal government may not be quite the benevolent protector that we thought it was.
I've had him on my podcast.
I'm sure, but I just can't believe
seen
that
videos.
all of the people that build buildings think it's an inside job. So
Okay, what if 90%? Okay, what if 90%?
That would be pretty impressive.
If 90%
That'd be
believe
pretty impressive.
it was a
Shit, 50%
inside job.
would be impressive.
Exactly. It's
50% would be impressive.
It's about in the 90s.
I don't know if that's right. So I don't know where you're getting that number.
I'm getting it from Richard Gage, who's the head of
Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Yeah, and
right?
every
I know
year they add another couple hundred.
I understand, but you
they
know
keep
that,
adding.
But he
How do
might
you-
be a little biased, right? I mean, if he's the head of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and he tells you that 90% of the architects and engineers out there think it's an inside job, it might be a little biased. I don't know if that's true, and I don't think you do necessarily either. I think we're just guessing.
I believe it.
I would love to see.
100%.
I would love to see
100%.
an architect or an engineer that disagreed with him talk to him about it and go over the data. Because until that happens, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
No, nobody argues with him. Nobody debates.
That's
with
got to
him.
be. There's got to be someone who debunks that guy. Everybody debunks everybody.
No, they definitely a smear campaign. Are you kidding?
Right, but is it a smear campaign, or is it just that they're saying things that he's saying that aren't correct?
It's not just him. He's just one.
I understand.
He's one of many. It's common sense, dude. It's
Maybe.
just-
Okay.
It's just like
Right, but I don't know. I don't know anything about making buildings. I don't know
get
anything
it.
about
I
what
get
it
it.
takes for a building to collapse. I don't know.
Totally. I don't know either. Maybe it got hot. I believe
It's
it.
not just hot. It's
I believe it.
diesel
I
fires
wanna
from
believe all
giant
that shit.
tanks of
I wanna
gas that
believe
were in
that.
the basement.
I want to believe that. I want to believe that fires made it hot. And I don't want to believe they blew it up because that's scary.
I wonder
So I want to
if-
believe the fire.
If a fire
Let me
is
try.
in a basement and the fire has diesel fuel and it's burning at some insane temperature and there's fucking shitloads of diesel fuel down there, I wonder what effect that has. I don't know. Do you?
I'm pretty sure, based on my life's experience, that that's not going to bring down a building.
A lot
that
of
free
diesel
falls.
fuel life experience.
Based on common sense. It's common sense that if a building's going to fall at free fall speed, boom, like that. If a engineer after engineer after engineer, at some point I'm going to believe them. At some point I'm not going to.
I understand, Eddie, but I don't know if you've necessarily looked into the engineers that disagree. Have you?
I know. There's a smear campaign.
But have you looked into the engineers that
There's
disagree?
none. There's none. There's no
gotta be.
There's no documentary.
There's gotta be.
There's no
But a
documentary.
documentary.
Find a documentary. If there is,
What about just
if there is,
articles?
there.
Do they have to
No.
make a documentary for it to make sense?
What was that? So how are you going to? They have paid shills on. You think that they would have dropped the ball big time, like Ernest Biner in 1987 for the Browns. They would have dropped the ball.
Goal line. These are the toughest yards in football right here.
Draw to Biner. Ernest Biner.
Fumble.
Fumble the ball, and Denver has recovered. Oh, my. Biner had the first and goal and lost the ball. And Denver's Broncos will go to the Super Bowl for the second year.
Secret society, trying to keep their army.